Welcome to the first session of District 7815's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Accessibility Committee's 2023 Spotlight Series, Imagine Rotary for All. This session is entitled Equity, Diversity and Inclusion 101, Unpacking and Exploring Our Lenses with guest speaker Joanne Owuor. Here is District Governor Harvey Bass to introduce our speaker.
Bienvenue à la première session du District 7815 du Comité de Diversité, Équité, Inclusion et Accessibilité 2023 de la Série des Conférenciers, Imaginons Rotary pour tous. Cette session s'intitule Équité, Diversité et Inclusion en rencontre individuelle, Découvrir et explorer filtres avec notre conférencière invitée, Joanne Ouor. Voici le gouverneur de district Harvey Bass pour présenter notre conférencière.
Joanne is the organizational director at Cohesia Institute, has over 13 years experience working in the not-for-profit sector in leadership, research, and management roles, and has developed expertise in grassroots coalition building, designing and implementing anti-racism and culturally responsive strategies, community outreach, and leading multi-stakeholder engagement and strategic planning for migrant communities. Joanne is the co-founder and director of Azuma Network, an organization focusing on amplifying wellness for African, Caribbean, and Black immigrant communities and organizations through capacity building. Joanne also volunteers with several Black-led focused and serving organizations, including Battle of the Arts New Brunswick and New Brunswick African Association, providing consulting support in program development, strategic partners, grant writing, and community development. She has served in various communities and was the co-chair of the Fredericton Local Immigration Partnership Working Group for Children and Youth for 2 years. She was also a member of the New Brunswick Refugee Mental Health Committee. She is a member of the Department of Education's Black History Curriculum Committee and sits on the National Alliance for Racialized Immigrant Refugee Women. Joanne holds the values of racial equity, anti-oppression, and justice central to her work and engages individuals and organizations in this work through education, advocacy, and coalition building. And so, Joanne, it's all yours.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. It's very profound. Of course, I wrote it, so there might be a little bit of bias there. I'll definitely speak to that, but thank you nonetheless. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for your willingness to spend Monday evening listening to me, listening to us, having these conversations on specifically equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism. The goal of today's session is really going to be a very broad and very gentle introduction to this key and critical conversation. I really appreciated hearing the statement that was shared earlier about how equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism are core values within Rotary organizations. I think that having statements such as these certainly make it significantly easier to ground. If it's grounded within the values, it makes it significantly easier then to enact policies, procedures, and practices that reinforce the statements so that they're not just statements. So I guess I don't need much of an introduction. That was very thorough. And yes, I'm the Director of Organizational Development within Cohesia. And I'll just flip this forward. Okay, so for today, we're looking at our agenda. Again, it's an hour, it's not a long time. We will do a brief introduction on Cohesia, who we are, what we do, and how we show up in spaces. I have been instructed to make this as interactive as possible. And so there will be 2 breakout groups, group breakout sessions to allow for that space to have a deeper conversation. And I really value the space of breakout or the opportunity to have breakout groups because it does allow each of the participants in this space to have more of an intimate conversation. It would be hard to have a very broad conversation with 48 of our closest friends versus, 3 or 4 individuals in a group together. So I appreciate Kathy asking for that, and I was happy to build that into these conversations. The other piece, because we are only here for a short time, a big whenever we're discussing or creating space around equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism, it's the piece of self-reflection. So this is how I have chosen to ground these particular conversations, starting with the notion of self-reflection. And what we will do is we'll go through some guiding questions, and based on those guiding questions, or just prompts, I should say, then I'll invite you to go into the breakout groups and have a discussion based on those prompts. I was going to ask you to have introductions as well in that space, just in case you do land in the breakout groups and you don't necessarily recognize everyone who is there. So I really invite you to introduce yourselves as well, and then have a deeper discussion about the prompts that we will offer in terms of self-reflection. I will also flag, I've been instructed that the district leaders will be the lead facilitators in each of these spaces. So I'm sure you know who you are. So if you do find yourself in the space, tag you are it. Hopefully you've had, time, and you've had the space and the resources to, again, know how to facilitate the conversations. We did send some guiding information on how to facilitate each of the breakout groups. So I just share that, just to be clear, we're all on the same, we're okay with that. So after this initial breakout group, the self-reflection exercise, we will go into the key definitions, and some of this will be prompted by a video, but a lot of it will be a discussion. So we'll be looking at equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility, and talking about what that looks like and how that shows up in any given spaces in any organization as well. And finally, we'll have yet another breakout group where we'll have space again to just reflect on everything that we have either discussed earlier in the session, but also some of the definitions and just how that lands for you and what your next steps are going to be. If you do have questions, if you do have prompts, I invite you to certainly share them in the chat, and I'll certainly do my best. And I encourage also the facilitators, if anything leaps up and I'm not quite great at the chat, please let me know as well. And I also want to articulate, I did get a chance to this, so my name is Joanne, like I said, and my pronouns are she and her. So session goals, we are going to have, like I said, a lovely discussion. And really, as participants, like I said, we're going to have a very brief overview of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism. And we'll create opportunities, again, for lots of self-reflection on EDIAR in the context of yourself and also in the context of the Rotary. And obviously, before we start, because of the nature of this conversation, we need to have community agreements. And in the spirit of community agreements, I want to encourage us all to listen actively and respect others as they are talking. Step up and step back is another agreement. So oftentimes in given spaces, we often have individuals who might be more comfortable speaking up and sharing their opinions. And we also have individuals who might be more inclined to step back and let others let others share their opinions and they hold back. So I'd like to encourage you to use this space to also shift those perspectives. We kind of each know how we show up in given spaces. So if you are an individual who is often speaking up and stepping up, try use the space to step back a little bit and listen. And if you're an individual who's often perhaps stepping back and letting others speak, try use this space again to speak up and offer your opinions, right? So let's just, and sit in whatever the feelings arise with that, because that's part of the ongoing conversations in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism. Another piece we think is really important in community agreements is speaking from our own experiences. So not generalizing. So starting with I sentences, grounding whatever you're sharing within your own lived experiences, and not necessarily looking at them or they, or sort of speaking from outside of our lived experiences. No personal attacks, respectfully engage. You seem like a lovely group, so I feel like that's a given. Lean into discomfort. Learning happens on the edge of our comfort zones. In many of my other sessions, I often say that I am yet to hear about somebody who absolutely died from having an uncomfortable conversation. I'm willing to change that particular theory in all of my presentations. If you can give me a name or two of people who had a really uncomfortable conversation and just died, I will change that point. But until that point, I deeply encourage you to lean into discomfort. There is no harm in discomfort. It is just uncomfortable. but staying in that space and going through it, unpacking whatever it is that is coming up for you and sitting as to, I'm trying to understand why it is that it is coming up. This is, again, space and opportunity to go deeper into these critical conversations that need to be happening. And our goal in this conversation is to, again, gain deeper and deepen our understanding, going back to that space of discomfort. And as we're deepening our understanding, the other piece we need to recognize is we have to accept non-closure. Like, there is no perfect solution. There is no perfect answer. This is an ongoing conversation. It's constantly being changed. It's constantly being adapted. And that's something that we need to lean into as part of this ongoing conversations that we have, especially around the conversations of equity. So I think it is important, and hopefully everybody can agree with some of these community agreements. And I invite you again to take them back into the breakout groups when you're having the conversations, and just keep these top of mind. So Cohesia, we have just recently launched nationally, and it's been a very exciting time for us. So we are a national not-for-profit organization whose mission is to strengthen social cohesion across Canada. And we do this by developing programs and initiatives and services that foster a sense of belonging in communities and schools and organizations. And in particular, we do this by our EDIAR programming, which looks at and includes several incredible tools and resources, which we will go into a little bit later on. So we have measurement tools and process tools and training programs. This is the wonderful, lovely board of directors, and I know diversity is a key and critical part of the work that we're doing. Our board of directors is also national in its reach and its scope. And they're pretty great people. A lot of the work that we're doing is also grounded in a subject matter expertise. So the training courses that we're developing, the processes that we're offering, the measurement tools that we build, these are all grounded again in leading thinkers across Canada who help shape the content. So this is the team of subject matter experts that guide the work that we're producing. And this even lovelier group of people is the key staff, the core staff within Cohesia. And we're also national in scope. We work very closely with the universities. And so we have several student interns who are working with us to deliver the work that we do within Cohesia. So I spoke about the awareness or like the programs and services that we offer specifically around equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism. We have our measurement tools, quick EDI assessment tool. This is available on our website and it's free. And we also have specific 360 inclusive leadership survey. And these are all, again, equity centered. And we also have an intercultural development inventory that allows organizations and spaces to examine where they are in terms of whether it's cross-cultural communication or multicultural safety, but also allows them to look at especially leadership roles and how the leaders are functioning from a 360 perspective when it comes to equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility within the organizational spaces. All of these measurement tools that we have are tied to coaching as well. So because we're really trying to develop a space of developmental support. So once the organization or the individual is assessed, then they get coaching and support on how to further whatever areas of strength or further whatever areas or gaps might exist, to then work closer and closer towards becoming fully an equitable, whether it's a leader or an equitable organizational space. We have training sessions. This is where awareness is, and this is also a key part of equity, diversity, inclusion conversations. Once you realize that there is a gap, and sometimes this is a knowledge gap, there's individuals challenged maybe with understanding what the languaging is. How do you begin to have these conversations? And so whether it's education, whether it's through reading books, watching movies, watching documentaries. And then we also have this awareness training sessions that we offer. And these are either available online as workshops, 3-hour workshops, or they're available face-to-face as well. So it's a lengthy list of spaces that we offer. And often these are, we partner with CFRAC, so this is the Canadian Foundation for Race Relations based out of Alberta. And we also work with our incredible partner in Ottawa, Sanko for consulting, so that we're able to offer these sessions both in English and French, which is a key selling point for us in Asia. And the other piece that we have is e-training. So we recognize the value of that self-paced learning, where you can reflect and take time to sort of go through, whether it's the languaging or the resources or statistics around some of these, again, key issues in EDI-AAR, right? So we do have this cluster of e-learning programs. Our latest one is the Combating Hate and Extremism that we've just rolled out, and we're very excited about. So as I talk, I keep bringing up the importance of that ongoing learning and ongoing education, because part of what we need to be doing as we're getting more comfortable in these conversations of equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility is developing that capacity to, you know, self-reflect. And you'll hear me say that a lot. All these conversations start with an understanding of who we are, understanding of where we are, and understanding of how our histories, our perspectives, our lived experiences shape what we're doing. So this is, again, why we have this toolkit or these resources around awareness and increasing awareness, but also recognizing that the work is ongoing, and it needs to be ongoing because everything changes really fast. And in the spirit of that self-awareness also, we have the process. So once you know where the gaps are, once you've taken the training, what do you do after that? And this is where we have our group of groups of supports around processes. So we're looking at supporting organizations to develop long-term strategies, looking at policy and procedural reviews and recommendations, because again, having a beautiful statement is lovely, but how is that actually being implemented in the everyday? And how is that these policies that we're creating and these procedures that we're creating actually impacting individuals who are interacting in each of these given, in our given spaces, and more so individuals from equity deserving communities? How are they interacting within organizational spaces that we, again, have a really great broad statements about? But does the statement match the reality? So these are some of the conversations that we have as we support organizations to develop solid processes so that they are actually walking the talk, so to speak. We also do one-on-one coaching if incidents come up or if people just need some guidance. And we try and again tie our measurement strategies to the different surveys that we have to support organizations to develop meaningful plans. So in the spirit of, again, self-reflection, which is a theme that you will hear quite a lot, I would like to start us off with a little exercise. So I would like to invite you to just sit quietly and peacefully, or, you know, keep making chili. I think that was you, Miriam. But if you could create space to just listen to these. So what I will do is I will read 12 key statements. And what these statements are to encourage us in this space to consider how bias may influence our decision-making, but also to help us identify ways to curtail them. So what, like I said, I'll read out these instructions. I invite you to reflect on the following questions. And as we're speaking, if you could identify perhaps areas that need improvement, and within that space, look at how you imagine that you can improve on them, or even look at areas that surprise you. Like, you know, I think I'm pretty good in that area, or that specific prompt. And after I read these statements, this is where we will this will be the first breakout group. And I invite you now in your groups to basically answer the question, how did that land with you? Right? So once you get into the breakout room, introduce yourself again and answer the question, how did that land with you? Was there anything about the statements that surprised you? Was there something in what was shared that made you, you know, reflect a little bit deeper? Okay, is that okay? Okay, so I will start. I invite you to take, you know, the space just to listen. So, have you ever educated yourself about the experiences of people from backgrounds other than your own? Have you ever reflected on your upbringing to understand your own biases? Have you ever examined your own behavior and attitudes to identify how they may either contribute or combat prejudice? Have you ever changed how you use language to eliminate terms that may be hurtful to others? Have you ever caught yourself generalizing someone based on one of their group identities? Have you ever discredited someone's identity? For example, by saying things like, oh, I don't even think of you as fill in the blank. Have you ever comfortably discussed issues of racism, prejudice, systemic discrimination, accessibility with others? Have you ever spoken up when other people use prejudicial language or behavior? Have you ever openly received feedback about how your behavior may be insensitive or offensive to others? And how did you respond? Have you ever made a conscious effort to ensure people can contribute to a conversation regardless of their background? Have you ever worked to ensure that your workplace, the volunteers, or the environments that you are in reflect the diversity of your communities? Have you ever critically consumed media, whether it's news, programming, social media, with negative stereotypes or biases in mind? Okay, so those are the key 12 prompts. I invite you now to go into your breakout groups. And once again, it's just to have that discussion of, once you think about and reflect on, again, introduce yourself, reflect on the 12 statements. How did that land with you? What are your thoughts about this? Thank you. So I had a video to share, but it doesn't seem to be working. It was working in the background there for a little bit, but now it isn't. And I can't seem to find it. So it's clearly a sign that the universe needs me to talk some more. I was trying to give you a little bit of a variation in terms of the voice. So I'm curious in terms of how this landed for folks. So if there is one word that comes to mind from the self-reflection exercise and from your discussion, I invite you to put that in the chat, just so we can see what comes to mind for you and from that particular experience. So, sharing. Very interesting. Thank you. Lovely call. Glad you enjoyed that. Any other thoughts? Serving others. Yes. That's an important, that's a critical piece, right? Serving others. Allyship. Yeah. Ongoing journey. Personal awareness of privilege. Yeah. And each of us has that there's different points of privilege in our lives. Brought up had memories, but with improved relationships. Thank you for sharing. Always room for learning and growth, assisting others to move forward. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody who's shared the thoughts. Keep sharing. I invite everybody to take a glance at the chat to see what the perspectives are. Safe spaces, surprising. Yeah. And I think that is the biggest thing with this piece of self-reflection, right? Because oftentimes we are taken aback maybe or surprised as to how it is we're showing up. I think we all, and we all carry biases with us, every last one of us, and we all have points and places of privilege that we also carry with us as identities and as lived experiences. So that self-awareness allows us to bring this to mind, and it also allows us to reflect on how it is we can use these spaces of privilege to advance and to create, somebody said safe spaces, right? Create safe spaces, but also create equitable spaces for communities and for individuals who are not who need to have equitable and safe spaces created for them. So equity deserving communities. And that is the goal of equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility. The goal is always equity. So the video I was going to show had just a lovely 2-minute explanation of what equity is, and emphasized again that equity really is about creating and providing for each and every person in the space and giving them what they need, right? And the example that was being given in the video was this idea, just because we say everybody needs shoes, it does not mean I will go and buy everybody size 10 shoes just because everybody needs shoes, right? That might work for anybody who happens to be a size 10, but if not just size 10 shoes, size 10 stiletto shoes, right? That might work for a few folks, but it's not necessarily what absolutely everybody needs, right? So looking at how unique and what the unique needs are within any given space, and ensuring that we're looking at policies, we're looking at procedures, we're looking at supports that are able to meet the needs equitably of whoever is showing up in our given spaces. And if they are not in our spaces, we're also interrogating as to why they're not there, because there's clearly some kind of barrier and some kind of prevention around engagement. So equity is the fair and just treatment of all members of the community. And it requires commitment to strategic priorities. It requires resources, respect, and civility, as well as ongoing action and assessment of progress towards achieving specified goals. So this is not a 2-hour workshop, right? This is not a one-time conversation. This is a long-term investment. And this is time and energy and also emotional labor in order to ensure that you're creating equitable spaces. And then it's ongoing work after that. So it's not after 2 years of this, it's like we're done. Let's now put these policies, we have them on paper, we're good. It is consistent and it's continuous work. And any of these conversations around, again, diversity, inclusion, all of these are outcomes of equity, right? Let's see. So there's a lot of talk in terms of diversity, and I think in many of the regions we're really good, and sometimes that is often where we start. We think, okay, let's just attract 7 Black women and 5 members of Indigenous communities, and that are diversity done, right? But diversity is not that's not enough, right? And especially if we are not looking, again, going back to that point of equity, and that's why equity starts first in these conversations. If we're not creating an equitable environment, if we're not creating an environment where it is safe to engage as all these different, with all our different diversity dimensions, then our diversity efforts land as empty. They land as performative, right? So diversity is all the ways that people are different and same. At the individual and at group levels. So even when we appear to be different, or even when we appear to be the same, rather, we are still uniquely different, and we still have unique experiences as well that count and that matter. So organizational diversity requires examining and questioning the makeup of a group to ensure that multiple perspectives are represented, and that there's exact space and there is opportunity for these multiple perspectives to be shared. One of the greatest tools we have, and one of the exercises I enjoy, we don't have time to do this today, but I certainly invite you to take time, and this is again a wonderful tool in terms of self-reflection, is when we look at the different diversity dimensions that exist, right? So we have our personality, that's the blue piece. These are the pieces that we are born with, and these are the pieces that, this is just who we are. This is our makeup, introvert, extrovert, our personalities. Then we have our internal dimensions. These are things that we cannot necessarily change, right? Race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, our gender, physical ability, age, although that's, there's wishful thinking. I heard somebody say they were teenagers earlier in the conversations, right? Yeah, I hear you. So again, but these are still dimensions that define who we are and define how we show up and define how we interact, right? External dimensions, so these are things that can vary, but again, they still define how we are showing up in given spaces. So our geographic location, our income, recreational habits, our religion, our work experiences, how we look, our marital status, all of these external dimensions are also influencing and are part of our diversity dimensions. And then even organizational dimensions that have a certain impact on how it is we can interact and show up in spaces, right? Seniority, for example, if I've ever worked in, or even within this organizational space, if you have certain seniority, then within the organization, you have certain power and certain privileges and are able to make certain decisions that somebody who just started 2 weeks ago might not necessarily be able to have, or might not necessarily be able to do. So that is a diversity dimension that is also having an impact on how you are interacting and engaging in spaces, and also how you're creating space for, again, the equity deserving communities. So part of what we do with this exercise is the questions that are over on the right. So we again encourage that the spirit of self-reflection, individuals to sit and think, like, which of these dimensions are you aware of daily, right? In my own experiences, for example, my race is something that I'm very aware of daily. I would love not to be aware of it daily. And yet, because of the fact that I'm in a predominantly white centered space, I cannot help but bring attention, or I cannot help but notice that race is always an issue. I just recently came back from a vacation at home. I'm originally from Kenya. And it was surprising how that race was not central to my mind in that space, because again, I was not one of many. I was not one of, or the only one. I was one of many, and how that suddenly shifted. Suddenly, the diversity dimensions that were more I paid more attention to were completely different than this particular that particular internal dimension. So for you, what is it that you're most aware of daily? What is it you're least aware of daily, right? What are you most aware of at work? What are you most aware of in the Rotary Club, for example? When you were growing up, what was most emphasized and important in your family? Because that also defines how you are presenting the spaces. Which of these dimensions do you wish you knew more about? Which do you think is most misunderstood by others? And which dimensions do you think are missing in this particular chart, on this particular chart, I guess, because there are dimensions that are not captured here at all, but are still really and still play a major role in how individuals interact and how we all show up with our different diversity dimensions. So diversity is not just a single thing, it is so many different things. And whether it shows up as a privilege or whether it shows up as a barrier also depends on the different circumstances. So I invite you to sit with that particular exercise at your own time. We've heard conversations around inclusion. And again, and you'll hear a lot of these words, it's long-term work in terms of equity. Inclusion is no different. So this refers to our ongoing intentional efforts to ensure that diverse individuals are fully participating in organizational and in community spaces, and in all aspects of this, right? So sometimes if you sit and you look at the leadership makeup of spaces, is that really, again, reflecting what is the community? And then if not, why? Why would that be, right? And how is it that can be better addressed? So that's why I talk about like the decision-making process, because again, if you're not part of that decision-making process as an equity deserving group, and you're not represented in that decision-making process, then decisions are being made on your behalf that don't necessarily meet what your unique lived experiences are. It also refers to the ways that diverse participants are valued as respected members of an organization and community, right? So inclusion, again, ongoing work, constant effort, but worthwhile, obviously. And again, it's not a one-off piece, a one-off effort. We look at anti-racism as well as part of that, the key definitions that have been offered. And the Black Lives movement, the Black Lives Matter movement really brought anti-racism to the forefront of awareness. Not to say that these were not, for individuals, for Black communities, racism and specifically anti-Black racism has always been front and center, for 400 plus years. For Indigenous communities, anti-Indigenous racism has always been an integral part of conversations. These movements just brought anti-racism to the forefront of especially the larger society, despite the fact that communities have been speaking about this for very long. So anti-racism, much like the other definitions, is also the process of it's ongoing and it's continuous, and it is the process of actively identifying and opposing racism, right? So Ibram Kendi talks about, it's not enough to just say I'm not racist. How are you anti-racist, right? Anti-racist is active, constant effort, constantly challenging racism, actively looking to look at your policies, the behaviors, beliefs that perpetuate racist ideas and actions, right? It's rooted in action. I think that's one of the biggest pieces. Oftentimes we conflate anti-racism and, for example, multiculturalism, right? So multiculturalism is necessary and absolutely essential, and we need to create spaces that celebrate cultures and cross religions and all these key critical components, but it's not anti-racism. Anti-racism asks us to look at how we are holding power, how we're holding privilege, but also how we're holding prejudice, and begin to unpack that at its deepest and raw, deepest levels, right? It asks us to look at our individual beliefs. It asks us to look at institutional policies and practices, and it also asks us to examine structural levels and how these are contributing, again, to keeping racialized communities out of our given spaces. Again, ongoing work and ongoing effort and ongoing communication and dialogue. And really critical as well is accessibility. So when we're looking at accessibility, we have to encompass the broader meaning beyond just compliance. How are spaces, how are what we're offering accessible to everybody and along the continuum of human ability and experience? I was recently in a workshop, and as I was delivering the workshop, we were talking about accessibility and looking at some statistics around accessibility and what the needs are within Canadian society. And at some point, an individual in the workshop, so it was a virtual, I was virtual, but everybody else was in a room, and they were all staring at the screen. But the setup of the room really was not accessible, so that, yes, for some people in the room, they were able to listen in, but somebody did speak up and say, listen, like, I'm hard of hearing, and this entire setup removes me from this process because it's not been built to support what my needs are. Right. And so, and I thought, oh, I also have to take responsibility for that. I could have looked at closed captioning, and the individual says, no, I can't tolerate closed captioning. It's often off, it's often wrong. What we need to be doing as an organization is how do we then look at our policies and our procedures to ensure that we build this into our very DNA, so that in any given workshop, this is not an issue. So that was such an important point of understanding for me, and also for that group. And I think at the end of this is a policy building workshop that we're offering, and at the end of that was a new policy that was built into this organization's overall strategic plan, which is a critical conversation. But it also came from an individual's willingness to share their story and their vulnerability. And so that moves us closer in terms of creating equitable spaces, especially for this particular individual. So look at time. Okay, 2 minutes. So what I would invite you to do, so this was the final breakout room. Like I said, it's only an hour, so it's not a lot of time. But what I was going to invite you to do was to go back to breakout rooms and have a very open and frank discussion about how do your personal experiences shape how you approach equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism? And what is the current state of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism in the Rotary clubs that you each represent? And the other piece, this is the homework piece, is what steps do you and or the Rotary clubs need to take to continue to move forward with the work around equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism for you? In order to really, again, match up the statements with tangible and actionable steps. But because, again, looking at the time, there is no room for the breakout rooms, I would like to invite you to take these sentences or to take these prompts and to think about how it is, answer them maybe within your own groups, or create space to better unpack them. And especially the last one, what steps do you and the Rotary Club need to take to continue moving forward with this conversation, considering that this was just a very brief 1 hour, it's not even the tip of a conversation. So I really would invite you to go back and do this. I wanted to leave you with a quote. This is from James Baldwin. So not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And simply, this work is can be challenging. This work is challenging. It's uncomfortable. And sometimes it is easier to just turn away from it. But the responsibility, as you've taken on all these key and critical positions, and you're making an impact in the community, and it's in your statement and values, asks that you continue to do this work regardless of how it feels. So I certainly hope you take inspiration from the words of James Baldwin and continue to look straight at the work that needs to be done in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism within the Rotary clubs. And I certainly look forward to seeing how all your work goes. Again, this was short and hopefully sweet. And I know there's several more sessions that have been planned, and I certainly hope this has provided at least a little bit of a baseline. If nothing else, it's just that piece of constant self-reflection, and that's a solid start, because that will always lead you in the right direction. So I want to thank you for spending your Monday evening with me.
And I would really like to thank you. This was a terrific presentation. You're right, we probably could have used another hour. But yeah, it's there's a lot of discussion that needs to go ahead, and you're right, it's never ending. It's not just there's no real solution to it, and it evolves as time goes on. I think from the Rotary clubs that I visited, I think we need we have a little bit of work to do.
Absolutely. I wish you all the best of luck with all the work that you have to do. And thank you.
Thank you.